Your taste is trash. A phrase heard all across the internet and really anywhere where media, content, or art is being discussed. It's this little idea that there is a hierarchy of enjoyment, a binary scale of what makes something good or bad. And where the majority of your likes and dislikes land will depend on how great or how trash your taste is. And yeah, there is one. That scale does exist whether we like it or not. Compare something like Halo 3 to Chrome and yeah, there's a definite binary of what's good and bad on display. It's like trying to put Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood side by side with something like Garzy's Wing and saying that both of these anime are just as good as each other. Or, God forbid, that you prefer something like the cultural enrichment that is School Days. Some things are just objectively good and objectively garbage. There's no way around that. And in all honesty, when you actually take a minute to look at media and art and all that, no medium is really all that solid to begin with. Movies, music, anime, art, all of these mediums are absolute landfills, chock full of terrible experiences that really embody the idea, the smell, the feeling, the sight of trash. It's why the cream of the crop always rises to the top, as people like to say, and why we have wonderful ideas of what these mediums can be, due to critics, fan bases, and WatchMojo top 10 lists guiding us to the best of the best. But that's the thing. The phrase and idea of your taste is trash. Or rather, what it tends to ignore. I'm sure you've heard this phrase a million times. It's a boomer classic, and that's the phrase, one man's trash is another man's treasure. And frankly, it's more true than you would like to think. And no, before you ask, I'm not about to try and sell you the idea that art is abstract, so really nothing is good or bad. Because that's just a really stupid mentality. No, I'd rather talk about the idea of meeting art and media where it stands. And the bliss that comes with accepting that trash can be great too.
Hospitality. And you can't piss on hospitality. I won't allow it!
What are you going to do to me, Daddy?
Tighten my belt by one loop so I don't feel hunger pains. And your sister and mother will have to do likewise. Okay, Joshua, you want to get rough with me? You want to show me that you don't like the choice of this house for our vacation by going on a hunger strike? Well, I'll accept the challenge. But just remember, when I was your age, I really did suffer from hunger. We'll see who gets through this. But just remember, I've got more practice than you.
One of the most infamously bad movies that's ever been made is Troll 2, a low-budget horror film from the 80s that, in its title alone, already shits the bed, as it's nothing about trolls and is actually about goblins. The poster shows a monster that isn't in the movie, and even the child you see here isn't the same kid who serves as the movie's protagonist. And as for the actual art itself, its story makes absolutely no sense, and the acting on display shows that the talent that they hired is about as on par with the writing team.
They're eating her! And then they're going to eat me! Oh my God!
But I bet you recognize that scene. This has probably appeared in some sort of video or meme that's made you laugh in the past. It was pretty popular 10 years ago, and that's because despite the levels of garbage that this movie reaches, Troll 2 is a roller coaster of surrealism. So much so that it stretches so incredibly far that it transforms itself from being just a simply bad movie into something that's entertaining for all the wrong reasons. Hence why many big channels over the years have taken this movie as a topic to ridicule and mock. It's one of those so bad it's good sort of movies. And that sort of thing might be a bit gimmicky when it's done intentionally, like The Incredible Bulk, but when it's not, and the actual end product is just naturally that, it makes the whole experience one that is a joy to watch. This is not a strange or rare phenomenon either, as even a movie as broken and bad as The Room has become an ironic classic that many people love to watch with their friends, and even others have found some post-ironic joy from it. And that's because despite what the mainstream opinion deems to be good or bad, that opinion rarely equates to the enjoyment factor of the media. Anyone who's been subscribed to my channel for a little while now is probably used to me talking pretty highly and praising bands, games, and even music genres that the grand majority of people might scoff at and see as kinda shit. Yet somehow me and thousands of others find a lot of fun and intrigue in these things. Crunkcore is a great example of this. It's an awful genre of music. The core elements on display here are built completely on the ideas of irony and so bad it's good. It's an entire music scene built on the idea of emo and scene kids screaming over crunk beats about living in the hood and getting bitches. You can just look at any of the classic music videos from crunkcore's golden era, and they're all terrible. But despite that, it's a genre of music that's just a lot of fun to listen to. The absurdity of it all, and the self-aware humor and the raunchy lyrics, it all culminates into something that's just a lot of fun. And yeah, crunkcore is something that you really wouldn't want to tell someone that you enjoy, because for anyone who doesn't like it, they have every reason not to, and every reason to think that you're a freak for even catering to the idea of liking something like it. But despite that, if you do get it, if crunkcore clicks with you and you find it entertaining, well, there's nothing else quite like it. It just scratches an itch, and it comes across as something that nothing else can, no matter how trashy it is. And this idea is, again, not just for things that are deemed culturally stupid or unpalatable. Let's just take a look at something that was beloved. Let's take a look at Vaporwave. Vaporwave is this post-ironic subgenre started as a joke, taking old songs and slowing them down to absurd degrees just to throw a chorus and flanger effect on them and call it a day. Yet it all still grew into this formidable internet giant that defined nearly a decade of discourse, including aesthetics, music, and even unreadable text. And you can still feel its influence to this day. While sure, it's far from the popularity that it had at its peak, it still has a huge and loyal following, filled with mostly people who didn't care about the ironic nature of it and just loved it for what it is. Now, I'm not just trying to bring these things up to lionize crunkcore as this totally not trashy, totally not garbage genre of music, or to demystify vaporwave and point out that the entire thing is just built on irony and stupid, and nor am I trying to sell you the idea that Troll 2 and The Room are cinematic masterpieces. Rather, I'm just trying to convey that taste, trash or golden, is subjective. And just as one man's trash can be another man's treasure, one man's treasure can be another man's trash.
Subjective. Based on or influenced by personal feelings, tastes, or opinions.
What a piece of shit.
And this brings us to the idea of subjectivity. While yes, I do think that art and media can be quantified on a scale of good and bad objectively, as objective quality is just a matter of fact, personal opinion, interest, and meaning are all products of subjectivity. For example, it's objective that a Subway sandwich sucks and is of much lower quality than a high-end sandwich that you would get from a classy restaurant. But for a large portion of the population, they will subjectively still prefer that garbage Subway sandwich. And media is exactly the same way. And we can observe this in real time by just taking a look at two different games. Silent Hill 2 is objectively a masterpiece. From its cultural impact, its popularity, graphics and storytelling for the time that it came out, and just the overall quality of it makes Silent Hill 2 one of the best and most integral pieces of gaming history. But despite the objective facts of what the game is and its quality, it's still something that on a subjective level can be torn to absolute shreds. To those unfamiliar with survival horror who just don't really understand the era that this game came from, Silent Hill 2 can just be an obtuse mess, with terrible controls, gameplay that can be seen as boring, and a story that could be seen as pretentious as it is not scary, at least when compared to something from more modern times, especially something like Outlast, which is much more fast-paced and adrenaline-pumping, and let's face it, to the everyman it's a way more scary experience just because of its shocking and intense quality compared to something that's more quiet and subdued like Silent Hill. As much as I might personally love the game and how it plays, someone who's never had a PS2 can just grab an emulator of it, boot this thing up, and instantly be bombarded by sluggish combat, camera angles that if you aren't a fan of right off the bat would be frustrating, and voice acting that's on par with your favorite adult film. The thing is that most fans of Silent Hill 2 would call a person who thinks this way uncultured, or they might say something like they don't get it. And while that may very well be true, it doesn't change the fact that what you and I might see as a golden and unbeatable piece of media is just trash to someone else. And no amount of our finger wagging and trying to act above them is going to change that. Because to them, it's subjectively trash. Now, to give an example on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have a terrible game that, aside from a few people trying to lionize it the last few years, has always been seen as one of the worst and most broken games ever made. And that's Kane Lynch 2 Dog Days. Kane Lynch is notorious. Both games reviewed awfully and were seen as nothing but shit experiences, not worth the money or hassle by players. Though especially with Kane Lynch 2, the game is known for being this glitchy, frustrating mess with really mid gunplay, awful visuals and sound, and a story that is just ugly and unfun to experience. In other words, it's seen as a piece of trash. But if you peel back the layers, Dog Days is actually a misunderstood masterpiece. It's a harrowing and horrifying experience full of blood, tension, and creative gold. This is a game that I actually made a video about, going in great detail on how I see it as the embodiment of the aesthetic of violence. And if you look at this thing as a critique on violence in media, all those glitchy and disorienting visuals, camera shakes, distorted and broken sounds, as well as the game's ugly and scattered story, well, they culminate into something that's honestly one of the best and most powerful expressions of violence told in any artistic format. As a piece of art, Kane Lynch 2 is an absolute masterpiece, and something that should be deeply praised. But again, that is subjectivity talking. Because as an actual game to be seen as nothing more than a game, it's awful, and it's easy to see why it was nothing but a piece of trash to be forgotten and less laughed at. Ultimately, the quality of a piece of art is subjective, at least in how it matters. The objectivity aspect is really not all that important when all things are considered, though, because it goes back to the idea of the enjoyment and value that you personally get from something, which at its root is subjective. In reality, objectivity is just a good way of, I guess, having a buyer's guide, or maybe seeing if something is up to a certain quality standard that you want it to be at before you engage with. Because obviously not everyone wants to take chances on things that might not be guaranteed to be great experiences. Though, that's where objectivity kind of runs into a bit of an issue. And this is a bit of an interesting aspect to talk about. And that's just how fickle the quote-unquote objective opinion can be when we leave it in the hands of critics and the masses. This is an ancient video from the one and only Melonhead. Fantano is well known for his disdain and hatred for the genre of nu metal. And even back in 2011, this was the case. And this review of Gold Cobra by Limp Bizkit is just a silly little meme video of him eating whatever slop he's having for lunch. It's Fantano's way of saying, I'm not reviewing this, I hate this. And it's just some harmless fun, he's not doing anything wrong here. But this video, funny enough, does actually capture the cultural opinion and the, at the time, objective value that nu metal held during this era. In the mid-2000s to the beginning of the 2020s, the once inescapable and beloved genre of nu metal was seen as little more than a joke to be scoffed at. To the point where formative bands famous for being pioneers of the genre ran from the title as far as they could, or at least had many fans doing mental gymnastics trying to separate them from the pack by using terms like alternative metal, and claiming because some of these bands and artists didn't sound like the generic rap metal of the time, that somehow that removes them from the genre. But rap metal was just one small part of the entire nu metal ethos, which, to shill again, I have a video going over, though it's a bit old, so don't expect the best editing in the world. But to surmise a lot of what I talked about in that video, nu metal was a grassroots genre that, over the course of a decade of influences, culminated in bands like Korn and Deftones forming, and in their early days, doing a lot of experimentation with rock, metal, hip-hop, and alternative, and fusing it into what you would consider nu metal today. And it was extremely successful. There's a massive list of artists who sat as straight-up A-listers with multi-platinum selling albums that sold out stadiums and got critical acclaim. And the genre of nu metal itself ended up growing into this giant monster with niches within its niche. A lot of these bands would end up selling out stadium tours, having their own festival-style shows, and were on constant play on MTV. But like with anything else, nu metal had its day and faded in popularity. The only difference here is that in the case of nu metal, when its wave died, there was a giant amount of critics who had always just fucking hated the genre, as well as a bunch of eager hipsters and true metalheads who saw it as nothing but trash and would soon come to dominate the discourse around the genre and browbeat it into oblivion. And this would lead to over a decade's worth of coverage where you would see articles like this, and the mainstream opinion of the genre being that it was a mistake, even having bands that helped inspire the genre say much the same thing.
Better or worse, Rage Against the Machine seems to have planted the seeds for the genre that sprung up known as nu metal. My apologies.
To the world past 2003, these bands were never good. Nu metal was always garbage, and if you were an unironic fan of any of these bands, then you were probably a poser or a loser. And you know what? Hey, sometimes fads happen, and they really are just bad and only worked at that small moment in time where they were at their peak. The only problem here is that nu metal had a massive resurgence, and even an underground one much earlier. It goes to show that these objective opinions about a quote-unquote trash genre of music were nothing more than fickle views themselves. Now, does this mean every band from the nu metal scene was an amazing revolutionary group changing the way that music was written? Fuck no. But the point here is that just like anything else, it's a genre of music that some like and some don't. Nothing about it makes it inherently good or bad, and oftentimes the idea of tossing the baby out with the bathwater with an entire genre of music is just an ignorant and stupid way of viewing art. I mean, hell, another great example of this would actually be anime of all things. Back in the day when anime first came to the West, it was this weird niche, but people enjoyed it. Things like Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball were what dominated the genre here, and that's what most people just saw anime as. But as time went on and we got to the late 90s and into the 2000s, anime would end up quickly being written off as a lame and stupid medium for nerds. While it always had a certain level of popularity, especially with mainstream shows like Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball, it wouldn't really save it from the majority of people's opinions being that anime was weird, it was full of really crappy shows like Naruto and Bleach, and in general was just this really cringy thing because weeaboos liked it. I'm sure if you have any millennial friends that at some point you've probably heard them whine about how they got bullied for liking anime back in the day, well, now everyone loves it. And yeah, that's actually kind of true. While anime was never hated and shafted on to the level of something like nu metal, it did go through a similar phase. And it wouldn't really be until the mid-2010s where it started to become the popular thing that it is now. At least mainstream popular. It was still big. Cultural attitudes and mainstream opinions are just as fickle as anything else, and they're about as fluid as a river. One day they're going to be extremely positive, the next they might be neutral, and at other times they will be absolutely negative. One would only need to look at the band Nickelback to see that play out in real time. Being a band that came out, blew up, had a huge amount of hits, played giant stadiums and festivals, only to get memed on and hated into oblivion, to where now people are back to thinking they're pretty cool again. To cut to brass tacks, unless we're talking about things that are truly objective, the idea of what's good and bad in terms of art, media, and expression is just that, it's opinion. But putting a ton of stock and importance into what people say or think is just stupid. It's a waste of time because for the grand majority of us, opinions on art and media are extremely subjective at their core. If your opinion is really just dependent on mainstream acceptance and whatever moral arbiters of taste have to say, then are you truly a fan of anything? Shouldn't your own thoughts and opinions be derived from your own tastes, the enjoyment that you get, and the meaning you derive from any of the art and media that you consume? Because if you don't have any subjective thoughts, you're just a robot. But maybe we should break this down a little bit. A24 films are objectively amazing. Their cinematography is top of the line, their artistic direction and aesthetics are beautiful, and the acting that they have on display in just about all of their films are some of the best to find in the horror genre. And these movies are definitely lauded for that, with heavy critical acclaim and mainstream attention. They're essentially the modern benchmark for horror, especially when compared to the never-ending slop that we see in the horror genre. But all that praise aside, this is just an objective reality and an objective opinion at that. Objectively, these movies are amazing. Now, my subjective opinion, on the other hand, A24 movies are boring. They're overhyped and pretentious films, and underneath all of that objectively great and amazing filmmaking, they often fall short in the entertainment aspect. And in my eyes, a lot of them are just so-so. Yeah, I know there's going to be a lot of people commenting and bitching at me for saying that, but that's kind of my point. Subjectively, I find these movies to be boring and not worth much outside of their eye candy. But again, they're objectively nearly perfect films. Now let's contrast these A24 movies with a beloved classic horror franchise, Evil Dead. Evil Dead is one of the best series to ever find its way onto a VHS tape. And for those unfamiliar with it, it's a trilogy of 80s horror films, a TV show, a reboot, and a spin-off sequel of sorts. But for today, we just really need to talk about the original trilogy. Evil Dead can best be described as a B-movie franchise, and I mean that in just about every sense of the word. The original series is full of awful acting, cheesy gore effects, monsters that look more funny than they do scary, and slapstick Looney Tunes style humor that constantly contrasts with the dark tone of the story. And for the story itself, it's batshit insane. By the third movie of this series, the main character ends up going through a time portal back to medieval times, and it contains one of the greatest scenes in movie history. Outside of some standout elements like the cinematography, this original trilogy should be seen as an objectively awful horror franchise, all things considered. But that's not even close to the case. Despite failing on almost every level of what is needed to be an objectively good movie, the Evil Dead trilogy is amazing. And not even in that so bad it's good sort of way, it's actually just fantastic. While the first is definitely the weakest in the series since it attempts to be a true horror film, just bludgeoned to death by the mishaps of an at the time young and inexperienced cast and crew, as well as the shoestring budget the entire thing was produced with, it still manages to be a decent horror movie, with some intense scenes and surreal atmosphere. The sequels would end up doubling down on some of these more obtuse elements that the original had, and would bring more intentional comedy into the mix. And at the end of the day, they would culminate in the classic horror comedy franchise that is still extremely popular today, with a rabid fan base and countless movies inspired by it under its belt. And that's all despite Evil Dead being a franchise that is objectively bad, and doesn't even come close to holding a candle to anything as objectively good as those A24 films. The key difference here is that Evil Dead is just a subjectively more fun and enjoyable collection of films to watch. Now, if you like A24 movies, I'm not here to tell you that they're bad, and I'm not even really trying to shit on them in any way. I'm just personally not a fan, and I think they make for a great comparison here because this is really the crux of the entire video. Despite all the weight that people tend to put on things such as critical reception and cultural opinion, in all honesty, none of this matters. And limiting yourself or even denigrating a piece of art for simply not meeting an objective standard is a poor way of viewing any medium. While there are qualities that make something good and bad on a technical level, the only true aspect that matters is, well, the subjective. Do you enjoy it? Art isn't science. It's not history. It's not a fact-based or technical medium, unless that's the point of the art or media itself. Art, media, content creation, whatever you want to call it, is just an expression. It's a medium that is built off the creator's thoughts, vision, and prowess. It doesn't mean that negative opinions don't matter or calling an objectively bad product a bad product is wrong. But at the end of the day, your subjective view is what's most important. Your taste, no matter how trash it might be, is what matters. Because that's the content, the art, the media. It's what you consume. In my eyes, outside the realm of opinion, the only things that are truly trash are the things that are forgettable. Bad music is still fun to listen to, even if it's not being enjoyed in the way that's intended. Just like a bad movie is entertaining to watch, even if it's still a bad movie. And that's another thing. Stuff that doesn't appeal to the masses aren't lesser just because public perception isn't keen on it. That's how niches are born. And in many ways, that's where innovation is built from. It's built from the trash. Industrial is a genre of music deeply entrenched in a lot of what you hear today. And despite popular belief, it's not just a noisy genre of rock music from the 90s. Industrial's roots and inception actually stem all the way back to the 70s, with bands like Throbbing Gristle, who went out of their way to make the most unconventional, ugly, and non-conforming music that they could at the time, which in itself was partially due to the popularity and later conformity that the members of Throbbing Gristle saw within punk music, which itself was a genre built on breaking the rules of conventional rock music. And with that, we can follow it down to things like the original rock and roll being a deconstruction and reconstruction of blues, and we can follow that down to things like free jazz, and well, you get the idea. Much of the most influential art was originally birthed from things seen as nothing but trash. And even in the cases of actual bad media and art, stuff that really is dog shit, well, if it's entertaining, if it's fun, if it touches you and sticks with you, even just because it made you laugh or cringe, is it actually trash? The worst thing a piece of media can be is forgettable, no matter how objectively great it may be. So I guess, in order to end things off here, I'll just say this. Your taste is trash, and that is okay. Now, before you go, this is my wall of shame. The list of names of people who bankroll this channel and keep me going. All jokes aside, I couldn't be more grateful than I am, and honestly, it means a lot to me that people like my stuff enough to want to support it. So, with that being said, if you happen to be one of these people, links to my Patreon are in the description, and if you want to throw me a one-time donation, coffee is also an option. Like most YouTubers at this point, I make absolutely nothing from the platform. It is peanuts and it is pennies. Essentially, it pays for my Adobe license, because yes, I do actually I subscribe and rent, because we live in a fucking clown world system now, legal copies of Adobe. I know, throw your tomatoes. I'm planning on moving to DaVinci, give me a break. But with that being said, your support helps keep me going, and hopefully one day I can get it to the point where I can do this full time, because fuck having a 9 to 5, that shit's so fucking tiring. But I'll save my work rambling and rants for a Patreon exclusive, we'll leave it at that. But with that being said, follow me on Twitter, subscribe, support me on Patreon, and I'll see you all in the next video.